Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us today, taking time to join us. My name is Itai Zak. I'm a product specialist at Ping Identity, focused on MFA and risk.
I'm Anthony Behor, Manager of Customer Success at Ping Identity.
So, where is the clicker here? Sorry. Okay, so thinking about passwordless, we usually think about technology. We think about which vendors are we going to use, which factor are we going to use. But regardless of the technology that we are going to use, there are lots of steps and processes that we need to take care about, and we need to think about when we start to plan our passwordless journey. We need to think about where we start, what we should start immediate, which type of teams needs to be involved, how we should communicate that to the organization. So Anthony here from Customer Success, he did this kind of implementation with some of our customers, and he's going to share some insights from those journeys. But before that, talking about passwordless, passwordless is a journey. And this journey looks different for different organizations, right? We can't eliminate passwords in one day. It takes some time. We know that the end goal is similar to most of us, right? Eliminate all passwords completely. But we need to start that journey, and we need to think about user experience and security. We want to improve them along the way, of course. So we at Ping, we look on that journey as 4 big milestones. And between those milestones, there are many middle steps that you will have to achieve along the way, right? Lots of administration stuff and also technology stuff. If you look on those milestones, if you look on those in the middle, the order between them can be changed. It might be consolidated. It really depends on your organization. We know that it's not one size fits all, right? It doesn't look exactly the same for all of us. But we do know that the end one, I think we can agree on that, that the end goal is pretty similar for all of us, right? Passwordless for all use cases, after we eliminate and have, become a kind of passwordless organization. Now, the first step, Centralized Authentication Authority, is pretty important. We see it as very important. You want to make sure that you have one solution, one centralized authority, that all passwordless flows go through there. Think about self-service management. Think about device recovery, think about the user experience, the same as you don't want to manage users and passwords in a different repository, right? And have multiple passwords for a user. You don't want to have those flows in multiple solutions. So this is a very important one. Now, when you pass that and you think about phasing out passwords, you might want to start only with web, for example, and we have customers that do that. Some of them actually start with reducing passwords, rely more on MFA, including risk in their authentication events, right, to check their risk. And some of them go completely to FIDO, right, and do passwordless with FIDO. If you didn't pass completely or you didn't do completely the phase 1, you can still start with that. You can, for example, cover 70–80% of your applications. And later on, the rest, right, those legacy applications that might sit under different flows to the passwordless flows. If you did pass complete the first phase, you have more flexibility. You can choose maybe to do passwordless for web and desktop all together, and kind of consolidate these 2 milestones, big milestones that we talk about. And then you need to start to think about your equipment. For example, you might have Windows and Mac devices. Maybe not all your devices have Touch ID or Windows Hello, platform biometrics on there. And maybe you have other use cases. Maybe you have shared devices in your organization that users use them. Maybe you have users without smartphone if you want to fall back to mobile devices. Maybe you have users in manufacture floor that have gloves and masks on their face, and they cannot use Touch ID or face recognition, and they need a different flow. So you need to think about all of that in advance and how you're going to solve those. And besides of that, of course, there are the non-tech hardware that you're going to hear about them very soon. So like I said before, the ultimate goal is have passwordless flow for all use cases. Now we also think about RDP, SSH, Radius that we might didn't think before, right? About Radius VPN. It's maybe about time to move to SAML if you're still using Radius. That's the recommended way to do that. And you need to think also about other stuff like new hires, how we onboard new people to our organization without password. They get maybe their device to home, right? And now they need to authenticate against your Active Directory probably. You need to think about it as well. You need to think about users that lost their devices, and now you need somehow to verify this is the user, right, before you let them pair a new device. So now you need to think about ID verification, for example, and risk and fraud to make sure this is the same user and not taking risks. And you need to think about how you orchestrate all of those capabilities together, right, to have one or more than one registration and authentication flows that are easy to manage and familiar for the users. So this is, you want to start to think about all of this now, right? But it's more to implement later. But above all of that, everything I said, there is a change management that you need to think about. There is big change management that you are going to do in your organization if you didn't start it already. And this is what is Anthony going to cover today. So I'll now let Anthony talk about his insight.
Thank you.
Oh.
Now that you decided to embark on this journey to passwordless, what does it look like when rolling out? What I'm sharing with you today is just based on experience from enterprises and organizations that have onboarded passwordless. As you begin to evaluate passwordless, it can introduce friction, a lot of friction in the beginning. However, the end result is a frictionless experience. This is sharing that experience. As you may know, with MFA today, right, you get a second factor, you done with OTP. What we're trying to get to is a passwordless flow. So when you begin thinking of this, the overview, you first need to understand determining those timelines, communication, what authentication methods, testing, ensuring and preparing your help desk, and then, of course, implement and roll out. The biggest hurdle you're going to run into is change management. Making this change, understanding and deciding what does this change mean. When you're getting into change management, a lot of organizations are using MFA today. Know your inventory. What vendors are you using today? What platforms? Understand your users and these groups. Also, when you're in this change management process, be sure that you define your timelines and that they're realistic. And also understanding the groups and users that are going to be using this technology. Are there going to be groups that have shared stations? How are you going to handle those cases? This needs to be known for your communication plan as well, including InfoSec auditors, compliance officers. And again, you are championing this change, right? So when you get in communication, again, you want to ensure that you have the rollout material, the guidelines, documentation, and regular announcements as you go through this process. Things might change as you get through testing, analyzing the devices that you're going to use for authentication. Which goes into the next big question. Deciding what authentication devices you're going to allow. Your organization could be a Windows or Mac shop, maybe both. A big indicator that I've learned working with enterprises is they have MFA today. So they're able to run reports and see what their users are using. Do they have Face ID? Do the laptops already have Touch ID enabled on it? If not, what does that gap look like? As you get further into this process, you have to understand administration. Things are going to change. What you're doing today is not going to be the same tomorrow. You got to rethink your policies. This includes risk and fraud. Is it the same user that's authenticating? How are you going to handle account lockout? These are considerations that have to be thought of early on in the process to understand how your testing is going to be. Also, rethink procedures. How is your registration process today? How's your account recovery? What does that mean for your help desk and your end users? When you get into testing, it's really important to understand the vendors and platforms that you're using and what your organization is going to use. A big thing that I learned through this is with the different platforms and vendors, the experience can be different for that end user. Are you testing this? As they roll out updates, is it an OSA update that changed the experience, or was it a browser? What is it? Also, ensure that you test with different departments. Make sure they're not all technical teams or users. You want to have a diverse population testing this for you to get that feedback. And experience is everything. So if you're using Chrome and Safari, you're going to have to register that FIDO compliant device twice. Are you going to use more than 2 browsers? What if something happened to one browser and they're unable to complete the authentication flow? Things can happen. So as you're testing this, you need to ensure to determine what your workforce is going to use and stick to that. As you get into the implementation standpoint, the primary goal as you're rolling out is you do not want to disrupt the business. Primary goal. Start with a small set of groups and users as you're going live with this. Start with 10 apps, 10 users. Let that roll out for a week or 2. After that, move to 100 users on the same 10 apps. 500 users. Once you get to a certain point, then you can increase the apps that are going to be using passwordless. That doesn't answer the question for new hires. How are you going to handle onboarding for a new hire? Well, first off, they're going to be receiving company equipment. It could be Mac, it could be Windows laptop. However, you want to ensure that you provide more than one factor to allow for passwordless authentication. One thing I've seen a lot of organizations do is they ship a FIDO2 compliant device with the laptop when they issue it. So starting on day 1, we already have 2 devices for authentication. However, they need to register those devices. So, of course, when they start, it is recommended they're going to have a temporary password to change their password, have a ID verification to verify that user, and now allow them to register their FIDO compliant devices for authentication. What does that look like with dealing with lost or stolen devices? Again, it's incredibly important to have more than one device for authentication. You also have ID verification, so maybe they lost all passwordless options they have. You can allow ID verification to help with that flow. One thing I've seen that was really unique with some enterprises is they have policies, so this goes back to that change management piece. What if I did lose all my forms of authentication for passwordless? I've seen them adopt policies where they'll allow a mobile app or desktop authenticator, maybe for a grace period for 2 to 5 days, maybe, as an option. Also, I've seen as last resort where they would send a hardware token, and then, of course, your help desk. And then going back on communication on that change management piece, that's why it's incredibly important to have communication to ensure all the teams that are involved with this change management, including the help desk, are trained and have the material to help with this new user experience. So lessons learned from this. It's certainly a journey. Everyone who I've worked with on this, it does introduce a lot of friction in the beginning. The payoff and the trade-off, of course, in the end, is that frictionless experience. There's several technology dependencies, too. From dealing with different browsers and OS, that experience on selecting my device, how it's prompted, it is different, right? Going back to if I'm on a Mac system and if I have Safari and Chrome and I'm using both, I'm going to have to register that twice, right? That key twice, one for each browser. That needs to be known and understood for your users. So having that material and that training material and communicating early on that change is going to happen is going to help you be successful with this. And again, user experience is everything. All right, and that's the presentation. Any questions?
No questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.